All right. We've been studying the harmony of the Gospels. This week we'll be in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, starting in verse 20. But the last couple weeks, Jesus predicts he makes his third prediction about his death and resurrection. He runs into Zacchaeus on the road. He arrives at Bethany, and when he's at Bethany, there's a guy there that's gained some popularity. And why is that? Lazarus has come back from the dead. All right. So we talked a little bit about that, and there's some hatred, some jealousy. The Pharisees, the ruling Jewish party, is trying to find anything they can do to discredit Jesus, to put him to death, to trap him so they can kill him. Now they have a plot to kill Lazarus, right? Because on account of Lazarus, a lot of people are going and believing. We read about Mary anointing Jesus' feet last week and what she did and some of the reaction because of that. Jesus curses the fig tree because it appeared that it should have fruit and it didn't. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And I do want to see here. As Jesus before he came into Jerusalem, when he looked at Jerusalem, what emotion did he have? Sad. And he what? He cried. And why did he cry? Israel was God's what? Chosen people. And he said, if you'd only known what? If you would have only known today, I'm here. And you guys are rejecting it, right? And he wept. What other time did Jesus cry? Lazarus' death. He got very emotional when he was around the people that were grieving about this. But Jesus knew what he was going to do, right, with Lazarus. He intentionally waited several days, so there's no doubt that he was dead. And he raised him from the dead. So here and last week we talked about, have we ever grieved God like we saw Jesus grieving as he looked over Jerusalem? And then we talked about, are we like that fig tree that from afar we look like we're producing fruit, but when you take a closer examination, you're not. So that's where we ended last week. Going forward, we're probably going to spend a majority of the time in the Gospel of John, just because of the things that are recorded towards the end of Jesus' life in the last few days. So we'll begin in John chapter 12, starting in verse 20. Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we'd like to see Jesus. Philip went to tell Andrew, and Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. So Jesus' popularity, or him being famous or known, isn't limited to what group? Just the Jews, right? When Jesus encountered Gentiles and when Jesus encountered Jews, think about this. Which one did generally displayed more faith in Jesus? The non-Jews. Do you think that's some of the sorrow Jesus had when he looked at Jerusalem? Where's your faith? Where's your belief? Your belief is stuck in the Pharisees and the traditions and in their interpretation of what God's law is. Jesus came to show God's perfect law. He preached what the intent of the law was with the Sermon on the Mount, trying to reset everything for people to know. So here you have some Greeks wanting to see Jesus. And it's kind of interesting. Jesus doesn't really say yes or no. He never, we'll keep on reading, but keep it in your mind. They want to see Jesus, so Philip and Andrew went and told Jesus. And Jesus replied in verse 23, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if he dies, it produces many seeds. The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternity. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servants will also be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my heart is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it is for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." So we have Philip and Andrew coming to Jesus and saying, "Hey, these Greeks want to see you." What kind of response is this? If we go back, I got the reference here. If we go back to Matthew chapter 15, verse 21 through 28, we have the Syrophoenician woman, and her daughter is demon-possessed. And she begs Jesus to heal her, and what's his response? Whose lost sheep did he come to look for? Israel's lost sheep, right? But she gave a wise answer, didn't she? What'd she say? Even the crumbs that fall from the children's table, the dogs eat. So he says, because of that reply and that faith, your daughter's healed. So you have the Greeks or the Gentiles seeking an audience with Jesus to see him. And he talks about the whole reason that he came is to die and glorify God, right? He's trying to get this point across to the Jews that he's the Messiah. So it's kind of an interesting answer/no answer, right, about whether you can have an audience with him. Jesus says in verse 23, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." And he talks about a single seed. For a seed to produce, it has to what? Die. Exactly right. And that's what Jesus is saying. But once that seed dies, you can plant it. And then how many more seeds do you get from that one seed? A lot more. So he's trying to use this analogy to this crowd. And then he talks about if you love your life, you're going to lose it. Have we heard this before? And if you hate your life, you're going to gain it in eternity. Verse 26, "Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me." And then he moves on into verse 27. And I've been trying to pull out the human element of Jesus as he walks on this earth throughout this study. What emotion does he have in verse 27? It says, now my heart is what? Who in here has had a troubled heart? He knows he's about to what? Is it a quick, painless death he knows he's going to suffer? It's one of the most agonizing ones that you could probably imagine. And there's a lot of suffering before even being nailed to the cross, correct? The scourging he goes through. So to say his heart is troubled, I think is, I wouldn't call it an understatement, but I think we need to look at that perspective.
I think it's a blessing that we don't know our future because we're troubled enough without knowing. And yet Christ knew what was coming. How much more troubled must he have been than we are in our lives?
Yeah. Yep. He knew exactly what was coming. But he said, this is what? This is my purpose. And if he didn't fulfill our purpose, where would we be today? Our hope of salvation would be gone. So they want to see Jesus. And then Jesus tells them, whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servants also will be. And my Father will honor the ones who serve me. And he says, my heart is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it is for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. He knows he's going to suffer, but whose glory is he seeking? The Father's glory. Tells us he couldn't even comprehend to be equal with the Father, right? Comprehend that? Or that he wouldn't let himself be compared to that. Then a voice came from heaven, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Verse 30, Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not for mine. Where do we see Jesus having a verbal conversation, and he says, this is for your benefit, not mine? Right before he raises Lazarus from the dead, right? Doesn't he have that conversation? I'll know. He said this conversation is for their benefit when he's having a conversation with God about, I know you always hear me. And then he calls him out of the tomb. So Jesus is saying that my purpose is to glorify God. And then God's glorify his name. And then you have this loud voice come. Evidently, people really couldn't understand it. Some thought it was thunder. Some of them thought it was an angel speaking. But if you were in that crowd, I imagine you remembered that moment in your life. Verse 30. Well, we'll continue on. This voice was for your benefit, not for mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And who's he talking about? His adversary, right? Satan. What has Satan been doing since Genesis? Deceiving, speaking lies. Jesus tells talks in one discourse that what's the native language of Satan? Lies, right? Is that language still spoken today? That language has survived since Genesis till now. How is the prince of this world going to be driven out? By the Lord. One by one. Jesus is going to die, be buried, and then raised from the dead. He conquers death, right? That conquering death is what's going to win the battle. So the battle's already won, right? We just got to lay hold of the crown in our own lives. And I've mentioned this before, trying to get us to think, but Jesus' heart is very troubled right now. Does Satan try to attack you when you're emotionally vulnerable? When you're struggling in your life? How hard do you think Satan has attacked Jesus throughout his life? Because Satan knows Jesus can what? Defeat him? We're told Jesus was tempted in some ways, all ways. So Jesus knows his time is nearing. And I've always wondered how Satan was trying to attack him during this time in his life. Verse 32. But I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. To be lifted up, what's he talking about? He's going to be elevated on a cross, right? To die. So verse 34, the crowd spoke up, "We have heard from the law that the Christ will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" So you have some people in this crowd, and what do they ask? Did they say, "We have read"? We have heard, right? We've heard this Messiah is supposed to reign forever, so how can he die, right? And what's one of the things that we've pulled out of this study that Jesus, he didn't struggle but people struggle with understanding. Where is his kingdom, right? It's a spiritual kingdom. And when he's before Pilate and he has that interaction, Pilate keeps asking him if he's a king. And Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it was, I could do what?" Nobody would be messing with me right now, right? You know, if you want to just kind of ad-lib it. So they're trying to put things together. They're scratching their heads. If the Son of Man's going to die, then who is this Son of Man, right? That's what they're asking. Who is this one? In verse 35, Jesus told them, you're going to have the light a little while longer. Walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. The man who walks in the dark does not know where he is going. Put your trust in the light while you have it, so that you may become sons of light. Jesus says you're not going to have me very much longer. He talks about unless a grain of wheat dies, falls to the ground, is buried, it can't produce more seeds. You got people coming to him wanting his audience. He's like, I'm not going to be here much longer, right? So he's focused on finishing the purpose that God gave him. And we'll read later that everything Jesus says, he said, who told me what to say? I'm speaking the words God instructed me to say while I'm here on earth. And when they ask him who this Son of Man is, does he give them a direct answer? He doesn't. He goes on with a different conversation saying what? I'm not going to be here much longer, and while I'm here, you need to enjoy what? Being in the light. He says, walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. And he tells them, put your trust in the light while you have it, so that you may become sons of light. When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. Even after Jesus had done all these miraculous signs in their presence, they still would not believe in him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet. Lord, who has believed our message, and whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And that's Isaiah 53, verse 1. For this reason they could not believe, because as Isaiah says elsewhere, he has blinded their eyes and deadened their hearts, so that they can neither see with their eyes, nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. That's Isaiah 6, verse 10. Do we see this spiritual situation still today? If you didn't hear Toby, he said this is what we were talking about Satan getting after him. If you can't get Jesus, he's going to go after people you know and love, or people in the world. Like I said, the language of lies, Satan's native language, has been spoken since Satan appeared as the serpent in the garden. And it has hardened many hearts and blinded many people over the years, hasn't it? And that's sad.
You talked about his grief at the type of death that he was going to die. And I submit to you that more than that was what he knew would happen to the disciples, the apostles, when he died on that cross. They were scattered, and they were distraught, and they did not know what all this meant. And they wouldn't know until they got to the upper room in Acts. But between that time, there was a certain amount of grief that he had for them. He couldn't describe it to them. He's trying to tell them about the darkness to come. And that darkness is when they're scattered. And he loves them so much, he doesn't want to leave them. And he doesn't want them to be in that dark place. But they're going to be there until he reappears, until they go to the upper room. And that's hard. It's hard for them because he's grieving over them.
Yeah, I agree with that. He knows the plan. And to piggyback on that, Terry, as we look what was written in Isaiah, that who has believed our message and who has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He's blinded their eyes, deadened their hearts, where they can neither see with their eyes nor understand with their heart, nor turn, and I would heal them. Does this describe the Pharisees and the ruling Jews right now during this time period? Did this describe Saul? At one point in his life, it did, right? And it took him being blinded physically in order to receive his spiritual sight, right? He had to be in darkness, losing his sight. He had to have something major in his life shake him up to change his mind, to change his perception. So, a lot of times as I read through this, I can't help but pull the Apostle Paul into this because of how he thought he was serving God when he was persecuting the Christians, right? He thought he had a holy mission there, didn't he? And it was sanctioned by the ruling party at that time. But just think about that. People have been in this situation before, but Christ has still conquered them. Verse 41, Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they would not confess their faith for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. We can go back to John chapter 9, right? There was a healing. A man that was born what? Born blind. He was healed. And this guy stood toe to toe with the Pharisees talking about Jesus, right? And he's like, it's amazing. This guy opened the eyes of a man who was blind, but you don't know where he came from. And then it's like, and then he said, do you want to be his disciples too? How did that end for this man? They threw him out of what? The synagogue. And when Jesus heard about it, what did he do? He went and found this man and told him, I'm what? It's one of the few times he's what? I am the Messiah. They had that conversation, and the guy worshiped him. So here a lot of people believe, but they don't want to confess it or show their faith because of getting kicked out of the synagogue. And the next phrase, or next verse, verse 43, for they love praise from men more than praise from God. I think that's one of the saddest statements in the gospel. Who would we rather have praise from in here, brothers and sisters? Our Heavenly Father? At one point in Jesus' ministry, Jesus didn't want the praise or validation of man because of what? Said he knew their hearts. And I don't want a verbal answer. I'm asking a question. Do you know anybody that loves the praise of men more than the praise of God? You've seen people like that, dealt with them in your life. Maybe it's, I'm almost persuaded, but come back at a more convenient time. So Jesus, I think in what we're reading today, we're understanding some of what was on his heart when he was weeping over Jerusalem. Number one, he knew they were spiritually blind, right? They didn't want to see. They didn't want to hear. That they loved the praise of men more than God. And even the ones that do believe, they're not going to take the final step, are they? Because of this. So he's lamenting all of that. And he's also troubled in heart because he knows what's about to happen to him, the suffering he's going to have to go through. And he goes through that for each and every person, whether they believe or reject him. We have the opportunity, like I said, to grab hold of that sacrifice. But a lot of people don't do it because they're too entangled in the world versus thinking about the spiritual. Verse 44, then Jesus cried out, when a man believes in me, he does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me. When he looks at me, he sees the one who sent me. I have come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. So Jesus says, if you believe in me, a couple of things. What? You believe in the Father, because the Father did what? He sent Jesus. And he said, if you've seen me, and what apostle asked him, show us the Father? It's Philip, wasn't it? And then what does Jesus say? He's like, Philip, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So the question I'm going to leave you with is, if we're in the light, in Jesus' light, when people see us, do they see the Father? When we're walking in this physical world, the way we walk and talk and interact, do people see the Father? Again, that's the thought I'm going to leave you with. So I appreciate the discussion and everybody's attention this morning, and hope you have a wonderful, cooler week.